All right. So, good evening, everyone. My name is Jessica, and I would like to thank you all for attending tonight's webinar, which is entitled Feeling All the Feelings. And we're going to thank our presenter, Kelsie Olds, who's the occupational therapist, for coming. Firstly, I'd like to take this opportunity to talk about our programming. We have some great support groups coming up this month, and I encourage you all to check out our website at nbadoption.ca. Most of our programming is centered around our caregivers, and we welcome pre-adoptive, adoptive, kinship, and foster families to attend. So, the vision of New Brunswick Adoption Foundation is that every child or youth in the permanent care of the province finds a permanent family. So that is kind of where we're going for when we talk about all the ways that we can help our kids benefit and get through their needs with our sensory stuff tonight that we're going to chat about. So I'd like to go over a few small housekeeping issues. I'll ask that everyone remain on mute throughout the presentation. When you arrived, you came on mute, so we're going to ask that you stay that way. Please feel free to write any questions in the chat. We love interactions, so go ahead and ask them, and I will pull the questions out in a good time for Kelsie. I'll be following you, and we will make sure that the space is created for you to ask your questions. Please feel free to change your screen to speaker view. This option is located at the top right-hand corner of your screen. If you click view and scroll down and click speaker view, and that means that you will only get to focus on beautiful Kelsie over here in her presentation screen, and that will take away any distractions from the rest of the many people on Zoom. And finally, this webinar is being recorded for future viewing, and it's also being live streamed for the first time to our private Facebook group. So this streaming will end for our question and answer period, so the recordings will all stop. So if you're watching us over there, next time, take the chance to register, and then you'll be able to take part in this part of the webinar. And so that's it for me. So I'm going to turn you over to Kelsie, our occupational therapist, which I love the name that you have. And I remember when you actually developed that name, and I was so excited that that's the one that you came up with. But I'll turn it over to you to start our presentation.
Hi. Yeah, so I'm Kelsie. I'm the occupational therapist. Before I put my slideshow up on the screen, I don't usually do much of a bio for myself on these presentations that I do, but I wanted to give you a little bit of a note up front about why this talk and why this audience is so important to me. To me, adoption and occupational therapy have almost been synonymous in a strange way since I was 13. Some friends of our family adopted a baby girl and wrote a blog about it. And I, in my newfound permission to use the internet, read that blog. I fell in love with their family as they talked about like the complicated realities and processes of adoption. And when she needed occupational therapy, I thought I could do that with my life. My husband and I first tried to adopt a baby internationally, just like I had seen on that blog. And in a surprising turn of events, after about 6 months in the process, then that baby's family decided to take him back home out of the orphanage and parent him, which is a story conclusion that happens semi-often in foster care and private adoption circles, but is rarer in international adoption. And it opened my eyes to a whole branch of the adoption triad that I had been ignoring, to the importance of agency on the birth family side of things when such a thing is possible. Later, we adopted another baby who was placed with us at birth, chosen to be his family by his first mom. She asked us to adopt again when she got pregnant again. We were surprised and it changed our life plans, but we said yes. And then when that baby was born, then she decided to parent. So we went back into the process and several months later ended up with our daughter as well. Two complicated stories, two complicated journeys as we figured out our children's unique struggles and strengths, and this journey continues every day. The adoption and foster care world is complicated. I have worked in it in many different capacities. I was a volunteer child advocate in the US system before having children. One of my first OT jobs was in a group foster home. This world has my heart. I just wanted you to know that before I dive in and start explaining how sensory processing looks across the lifespan I know that you might not have been there when yours was a baby. I know that you might not have had that privilege. I hear that. Non-traditional families are always in my mind when I'm writing about families on my page, and with the language that I try to use. Whatever you are to each other and whatever you call yourself, this information belongs to you, and I just wanted you to know that you're welcome here too. So let me jump right in. I'm going to get my slides on the screen. And I'm going to talk to you about sensory processing, regulation, interoception, some big jargony words that I use in occupational therapy that I see being used in parenting circles. And I love that these topics are coming more into conversation. And I also know that that doesn't mean that everybody always knows exactly what they mean or where they come from. And so I'm going to explain I'm going to explain to you some hypothetical kids so that I can explain to you some different types of sensory processing. So this is Sam when Sam is 3. Sam doesn't go to school or daycare yet. Sam stays home full-time with their caregiver. Sam gets very upset at loud noises. Sam's caregiver finds himself trying to minimize sudden loud noises in the environment. They keep their phone on mute. They make sure to never run a blender or vacuum or hairdryer while Sam is in the house. If the family has a dog who barks sometimes, or the family lives near planes or hears sirens going by, then it might start to feel impossible to keep from setting Sam off. They're melting down or they're panicking several times throughout the day at loud noises. Sam also panics or gets upset with typical components of the hygiene routine, like having their nails trimmed or having their hair cut or brushed or washed or taking baths. And the level of upset might feel excessive to Sam's caregiver. Their caregiver might struggle to find the balance between obviously needing to clean and take care of their child while not wanting to have to hold their child still in order to cut their nails or fight about the bath every single day. It feels bad and it feels icky, especially if they're coming from hard places. Sam will only eat a very limited range of foods. And it seems like these are maybe like the typical kid foods, but soon Sam's caregiver finds himself wondering if it could be more than that because of just how limited Sam's diet is. Sam goes through a phase where they will literally only eat ketchup at some meals, not even dipping something in it, just eating it. Other people tell Sam's caregiver just refuse to give Sam something else to eat, and they'll eat when they're hungry. And Sam's caregiver might even try it once, but then caves after Sam literally refuses to eat anything the entire day, and it frightens them. Now I'm going to look at Sam when Sam is 6 and starts going to school. Sam shushes the other kids in the classroom, even when they're working at a reasonable volume for the thing they're working on. If someone drops a book unexpectedly or slams a door, Sam is thrown off, sometimes for quite a while. Sam gets outright hysterical during fire drills. If Sam gets a minor bump or scrape on the playground, that's it for the rest of the day. Adults sometimes get annoyed because of Sam's insistence on going to the school nurse or getting an ice pack and getting a Band-Aid for what might be like the teeniest scrape. Depending on the adult and what the adult knows about Sam, they might brush them off completely or tell them they need to get over it. Sam seems deeply bothered by rules being broken in the classroom, yet always has an explanation for why they themselves are breaking the rules or doing things their own way. Sam could be called uncooperative by teachers who are tempted to look at what Sam does through a negative point of view. But then when Sam has a teacher in school who really clicks with them, Sam is like their star student, deeply eager to please, wants to make sure things are done the right way. And then lastly, I want to look at a snapshot of Sam as they get older, in their later school, teenage years, even on into adulthood. Sam startles easily when there are unexpected noises. Even if the noise is quiet, once Sam's concentration has been interrupted, it's very hard for them to get their thoughts back on track. The jolt of fear that Sam feels when hearing an unexpected dog bark, phone ring, door slam causes a sensation of their heart racing that they really dislike and feel uncomfortable. Sam understands that touch can be affectionate, but it never really feels that way to them. They would strongly prefer that their head not be patted, their back not be rubbed, their shoulder not be touched. They understand that people do this casually or do it out of love, but it never feels like it conveys love to Sam. It just makes their skin crawl. There are still some foods that Sam simply cannot eat. Their caregiver might have always said that they would grow out of it, but they never have. It's minimally about the taste, but it's also a lot about the texture of creamy or goopy foods like applesauce, yogurt, pudding. They just can't do it. So maybe Sam sounds like someone you know. Maybe Sam sounds like your own child. Maybe Sam sounds like you. Or maybe Sam doesn't sound like anyone you know. Maybe Sam sounds like you some of the time, but not others of the time. Or maybe you feel like Sam when it comes to sound, but not when it comes to touch. That's all perfectly normal too. And I'm going to circle back to get to those things. So put a pin in that thought and we'll come back to it in just a moment because I need to introduce you to Alex. We're going to look at Alex at the same ages that we saw Sam. This is little Alex before they've gone to school, before they've ever been expected to be in that type of structured environment. Alex loves to know exactly how things are going to be, even before Alex can talk. It's clear they have an idea in their head of how the day will go, and any changes to that routine are not welcome. Sometimes Alex's caregiver is confused by how to categorize them. Sometimes Alex seems more clingy than their caregiver would expect, but then sometimes Alex seems more independent than their caregiver would expect. Alex doesn't seem snuggly and will squirm away from a hug, but if the family goes to an outing, Alex will hide behind their caregiver's legs or refuse to get down out of their arms. When comfortable and playing at home, Alex makes a lot of noise to themselves. It's like they're always singing or humming or chattering away to themselves, whether it makes sense or not to an outside observer. It doesn't seem to be for anyone else, just for them. On top of that, in some situations, the singing or humming gets louder and noisier, like when the family goes somewhere in the car, or even when they're walking through the shops. When Alex gets a little older and they're in the early grades at school, Alex knows exactly how things are supposed to go in the classroom, where things should be put away, the exact particulars of the routine. Alex is the person who can be counted on to keep the substitute teacher on schedule. On the flip side, if something needs to change quickly or be flexible, the teacher might find themselves struggling to persuade Alex to go with the flow for the time being. Alex has a great deal of difficulty when standing in line to go to lunch, recess, or specials. It seems like every other day, Alex is getting in a scuffle or yelling that another student pushed them. It doesn't seem to matter which student it is. The teacher is absolutely certain that some of these kids would never push another student on purpose. It's Alex can't be persuaded otherwise. They feel like it is always on purpose and it is targeted toward them. Alex has difficulty staying quiet in class during independent work time. Alex will look their teacher right in the face and repeat the rule about their voice being on level 0 while they work independently. And then 15 seconds later, Alex is singing Disney songs while they work on their work. It's like they somehow can't even just remember the rule. The teacher actually tried playing quiet piano music in the room to help, and Alex sang their Disney songs even louder, so that didn't help. And then as Alex gets older, in their teenage and adult years, they have a really good gauge for what will make them uncomfortable and are really good at planning their life around that. They know which stores they can get their shopping done in, and which ones will be too big and too overwhelming and too noisy. They know how to put away all distractions when they need to get work or homework done. They have no problem saying no to the things that they don't want to do. Alex completely stays away from crowds or long queues if they can help it. And Alex carries their headphones with them and listens to music all the time, in the car, on public transit, when they're doing homework, when they're driving, when they're going for a walk. Alex gets things done better when they're listening to music than if they try to do it in silence. Now, as it turns out, Sam and Alex share some qualities, and they might sound similar in some ways. And then there are also some key differences. Next, I'm going to talk about somebody who overlaps with Alex, but in a different way. We're going to talk about Sage. Sage, when they were little, gravitated toward toys and activities that make things happen. In Sage's independent play, they like to make a lot of noise, but it's more likely that the noise is coming from them pushing things over, hitting things together, dumping out bins of toys, crashing cars and planes, making exciting sound effects with their mouth. Sage loves toys where you push a button and something happens, but Sage doesn't ever stop with playing with these toys the right way. Instead, Sage will push the button a few times and then begin exploring how to take the toy apart, how to make the toy represent something else, how the toy flies through the air, what kind of sound the toy makes when it lands after flying through the air. Sage loves being in the water, whether in the kiddie pool outside or in the bath. One time, Sage's family is on vacation. There was only a shower available, and they thought that Sage would be too young to be able to use the shower. Turns out Sage loved the shower. They didn't even mind the water running down their face while they laughed and splashed. Sage has been known to pour out their own water cup on the table and splash in it if their parent isn't sitting close by to stop them. Sometimes, if there's no other entertainment available, like in the car, Sage might spit in their hands and play with the saliva. Sage is in constant motion from the moment they wake up until the moment they fall asleep. And even getting Sage to fall asleep is quite a feat because they will pop back out of their bed and run around playing. Sometimes it seems like Sage's danger filter is missing because they'll climb up things or jump off of things that make their caregiver worried for them, and it feels like their caregiver just can't keep up. When Sage starts school, Sage's teacher starts expressing concerns about Sage's attention. The problem is whenever Sage is given a worksheet or a tabletop activity to do, their attention stays down at the table for about 5 seconds and then starts looking at everything else there is to notice in the room, especially if there's movement. There's almost always movement because it's a room full of 6-year-olds. Sage runs their hands along the wall in the hallway, even when the teacher reminds them that they're supposed to keep their hands at their sides or behind their back. Sage picks at anything that's coming even slightly loose, which is how they unraveled a solid half-inch of the classroom rug during circle time before anybody noticed. Sage gets close to their peers when talking, which bothers some peers who would like more personal space. If Sage is supposed to work at their desk by themselves, they'll probably get up to ask the teacher if they can go to the bathroom, and then get up to ask if they can sharpen their pencil, and then if they can get a drink of water, and then if they can come up to the front and ask a question, and then the time period for working on that worksheet is over, and Sage didn't write anything more than just their name at the top. As Sage gets into their older years, Sage is known to their friends and family for being joyful and over the top. They dress in bright colors. They love fast-paced action movies. Every birthday, they beg to go to an amusement park and ride roller coasters. Sage is touchy-feely in a way that their caregiver may not even be. Sage still physically plays with and teases and roughhouses with their friends. They jump on one another for piggyback rides. Sage loves hugging and cuddling their younger siblings and never seemed to grow out of it or think that it was uncool, which Sage's parents find really endearing. The career counselor told Sage that they have a great, confident handshake. Sage never excelled at any particular sport, but enthusiastically participated in many throughout childhood. As a young teen, Sage dabbled in parkour or free running because they always loved climbing up and jumping off of various structures anyway, and so they even learned how to do handsprings and flips if they had the right run up. I will say that, anecdotally speaking, in my own experience, Sage's parents are usually the most likely to have showed up to a webinar when they heard the word sensory, because Sage's parents and teachers are usually the ones who feel the most like, help. The last child that I have to tell you about is Morgan. Morgan shares some qualities with Sage, but also to wrap things all the way back full circle, Morgan shares some qualities with Sam, too, the first child we talked about. I'll explain a little bit more about how these kids and their sensory profiles all relate to one another after I tell you some stories about Morgan. When Morgan was little, they were a super contented little person who was pretty good at independent play, even early on. Often Morgan would get so absorbed in their own play that they wouldn't even hear their parent calling their name or notice when their parent left the room to take care of a quick chore, like checking on the washer or dryer or getting lunch or a snack ready. On the flip side, Morgan needs a lot of support to be able to do anything that isn't self-directed, because even simple directions like go get your shoes might end up with Morgan contentedly playing with a toy they found near the shoes, or forgetting entirely and wandering off to do something else. Morgan bumps into things and falls off of things more than anybody else that Morgan's caregiver has ever met. It makes the caregiver feel anxious about the bruises that Morgan gets. They will fully walk into a door frame, even though Morgan has been in that house for years. The door frame hasn't moved. There was no urgency. It's like sometimes Morgan doesn't even seem to notice that things are there or how to move around them. And the caregiver took them to have their vision tested by the doctor, and the doctor told them that there weren't any visual concerns, just that they're probably just clumsy. On sunny days, when their family goes to the playground, Morgan will spend most of the time hiding in the shade. If they're on an outing without a shaded area to hide in, Morgan will just look extremely uncomfortable until Morgan's parent puts a sun hat on them. It never occurs to Morgan to get their own hat or to ask for it or even to name the problem. They just kind of squint uncomfortably or get fussy until Morgan's parent remembers that this is an ongoing problem. When Morgan starts school, they don't seem to notice that whole class directions apply to them. If the teacher says, everybody get out your notebooks, Morgan will completely miss the instruction until the teacher says, Morgan, get out your notebook. It's not that they're non-compliant on purpose. It's like they don't seem to notice that they're a part of everybody. Morgan literally falls out of their chair onto the floor. And then their teacher, who knows a little bit about sensory processing, thought maybe they're too wiggly for a standard chair and gave them a wobble stool. And that seemed to exacerbate the problem. Now Morgan falls out of their chair 10 times a day. Morgan is fantastic at math. They have a real knack for it. Yet on the math worksheets that Morgan does in their class, they routinely leave half of the answers blank. When the teacher points them out for Morgan, Morgan can give the answers easily. If the teacher highlights the questions with a highlighter, Morgan can sometimes remember to give the answers. But if it's solely up to them, they don't even give it a try. In their older years, Morgan notices about themselves that they seem to pick up on things more slowly than others do. If somebody changes the conversation topic quickly, Morgan feels like they're always a sentence or two behind in noticing and adapting to the change. Morgan wonders whether they say, what? Or can you repeat that? More often than other people do. Morgan has also never quite grown out of their ability to be completely absorbed in what they're working on to the point of missing someone calling their name. Morgan and their friends have an ongoing joke about their clumsiness. They can trip over nothing. They have to hold on to the stair rail to make sure they don't trip down the stairs. They always have some bruise of mysterious origin. There's another joke about how easy Morgan is to startle. It's like anyone can sneak up on them without even trying. In their high school, Morgan really struggled to navigate the big hallways and follow the room numbers without getting lost. When Morgan tries to go for a walk to a new local shop, they have difficulty reading the street signs or interpreting them. Okay. So now we've got 4 hypothetical kids in our mind. We've got Sam, Alex, Sage, and Morgan. I want to point out before I go on that these are made up hypothetical kids, but that they could be actual children. Like what I've described is well within the norm for what I see in my practice. However, these guys are hypothetical because I wanted each of them to fit completely and only one type of sensory profile. And in real life, people are less neatly fit into boxes than that. So when we're talking about sensory everything, we're talking about 8 senses. I know you learned about 5 in school. Hearing, sight, touch, taste, smell. There are 3 others that come up in this process of sensory problem solving. That would be your proprioceptive sense, which is your deep body sense of pressure and touch and hugs and squeezes, more so than just light touch, like I'm like touching my skin. It's like the weighted sensation you get from a tight hug or a weighted blanket, knowing where your body is in space, knowing that your feet are on the ground. There's your interoception sense, which is your inner body sense of like, there's emotional and also biological. So can I interpret the feelings in my body, like the physiological feelings in my body to know what emotion I'm having? Can I interpret the physiological feelings in my body to know what biological need I'm having? So my face is getting hot and my voice is getting shaky. I know that I'm mad. Or there's a feeling in my bladder that tells me that I need to use the toilet. Those are interoceptive sense. And then there's your vestibular sense, which is related to your inner ear. It's your sense of balance. It tells you whether you are moving, like people get car sick because of their vestibular sense, that their vision looking ahead is telling them that they're staying still while their ear is telling them that they're moving, and the disconnect is causing them to feel sick. Now I'm going to explain what I mean by sensory profiles. When I talk about sensory profiles, we conceptualize them as being along 2 different continua. And I've got this for my cutesy illustration, and then I've got the actual one that kind of sorts these out. So I've got two different axes. I've got an axis from low tolerance to high tolerance. That's how much you can tolerate sensory input. before you notice it or before it bothers you. And then there's the passive to active scale, which is how passive or active you are in seeking out the amount of sensory input that you prefer. So let's see if you can guess in your mind where in each quadrant each of these children would fall. Can you guess which of the 4 children has a high threshold for sensory input and is also active about seeking out what they need? Did you guess Sage? Over and over, we saw how Sage was touchy-feely, over the top, loud, in movement constantly. We would call someone who has a high threshold, a high tolerance for sensory input, and is active about getting that need met, a sensory seeker, sensory seeking Sage. What about the child with a low tolerance, a low threshold for sensory input, but who is still active about getting what they need? That's going to be Alex. Alex sometimes clings and sometimes pushes away. Alex does best when they know how the day is going to go because they can prepare themselves for anything unexpected. Alex shies away from unexpected touch and is constantly trying to cover up or drown out noises that bother them. Someone who has a low threshold and is active about getting that need met, like Alex, is what we would call a sensory avoider. Okay, so we've covered the active strategies side of the map, and what we have left is the passive strategies side of the map. So which of our remaining people has a low threshold for sensory input and is passive about how they can get that need met? That would be Sam. Someone who's on the passive strategy side of the scale and the low threshold is sensory sensitive. Now, sometimes the nuances between sensory sensitive and sensory avoider can be a little bit hard to pinpoint out exactly, and they aren't always super important because in real life, people don't fit neatly into boxes like they do in hypotheticals. But if you can imagine the difference between someone who strikes you as just literally not sensory, but just the word sensitive, someone who strikes you as sensitive versus someone who strikes you as particular, that is usually the difference between sensory sensitive and sensory avoider. The avoider's body has an instinctual feeling, especially in childhood. In adulthood, people have more of the capacity, if they have an active strategy, to actually pursue that and get that met. But children often run into barriers with they don't know how to do it safely. An adult won't let them, it's not appropriate for the situation, things like that. And so an avoider in childhood usually has an instinctual feeling of this is how we could be getting things right and we're not. While the sensitive child in childhood has more of a feeling of everything is wrong and I don't know why. There's like a little bit of a difference there, and it's a fine line. That leaves us with our last spot on the map, Morgan, the sensory misser. A sensory misser is someone who has a high threshold for sensory input and uses passive strategies to manage that. Sensory missers are, in my experience, the kids who are most often missed themselves, which is an interesting component of it. When someone is telling me something that they think is a behavior problem and I think is a sensory problem, these are a lot of times the kids who get overlooked because they often look content. What their teacher is saying or what their caregiver needs them to do isn't going into their mind because the environment doesn't have enough sensory input to have met their threshold for being able to take it in. But usually in childhood, they don't know that they need to do anything about that, or they don't know how to do anything about that. They're just going to kind of sit there and look content and quiet and look like not a behavior problem. So then it might get missed that they're not getting what they need because they're not connecting with what their environment is. So that's the 4 sensory profiles. You can see how each of the kids fits into each of these slots. It's important for me to say 2 things. One is that everybody in the world processes sensory information in one or more of these ways. Having a sensory profile is not like something that means you have a problem. Like everybody processes sensory information. And so it's not like, oh, you need OT if you are a sensory seeker. No, there's I would probably about 1/4 of the world are sensory seekers and probably, about 1/4 either way. And then the other important thing is that, as I've said a couple of times, real life is more complicated than this. There are many, many ways in which people can have more than just one sensory processing style. Some people really know that they fit into 2 categories all the time. Some people are like, well, in the morning, I was pretty regulated and I was pretty well rested and I'm a real sensory seeker. And then as the day goes on, my reserves get tapped out and I become more avoidant. Some people find that they fit one profile for one sense and another for another, like being very avoidant of sound, but very seeking for movement. You might have noticed a common theme with our hypothetical sensory profile friends is that their sensory profiles stayed consistent over the course of their lives. The exact particulars changed slightly, but on a larger scale, the theme stayed the same. Sage, fortunately, grew out of spitting in their hands and playing with it, or maybe an adult helped them stop because of hygiene concerns, but they still needed to touch and feel things in their environment so that they could make order out of the world around them. Alex figured out how to identify the sounds that were bothering them, or even that it was a sound that was bothering them, and how to address that in ways that don't disturb the people around them, too. This is really important because it speaks to something powerful, which is that people's sensory profiles tend to stay roughly the same over time. They might be in flux in all the ways that we've already talked about. They might tap out over the course of the day. They might be seeking in one area and avoidant in another, or there might be other factors that mingle in. But on the whole, people's sensory profiles don't tend to go away or fade to neutral. People have to live in their bodies with their unique pattern of sensory organization their whole life. This gets more complicated, especially with kids who have experienced trauma, because a lot of the things that I described that were sensory responses can also be trauma responses. Somebody could become very sensitive to a sound that is a trigger for them. Somebody could be sensitive to touch that is a trigger for them. And maybe if they had been born in an alternate universe where something didn't happen to them, then maybe that wouldn't have felt that way for them. The thing about this is that whether it was nature versus nurture, whether it was always there versus whether it was caused by something, it's still important to recognize that in treatment, in the way that we currently and the way that we historically treat people with sensory processing differences, whether the origin of that sensory processing difference is trauma or inborn, there used to be a lot of work around trying to desensitize people, usually by either forcibly exposing them to sensory input that they found distressing, or the slightly softer version, forcibly exposing them to a lot of input that they didn't find distressing. This would look like the idea that a child who gags or cries when they touch soft, slimy textures should have to practice touching soft, slimy textures with like a towel nearby but being withheld from them. And then this might be presented as a play activity. And the hope would be that if we play like this over and over, then someday their body will desensitize to it and they won't be bothered by it anymore. The problem with that is if we measure the fact that they're gagging and crying at the start of treatment and they're not gagging and they're not crying at the end of treatment, we are actually not proving that the course of treatment has helped them not be bothered. All we know is that it has caused them to no longer gag and no longer cry. But in a lot of cases, they're internally dissociating from the sensory input in order to cope with it, because they know that the adult is more powerful than they are and is going to force this on them whether they want it or not. Or they're learning to daydream so that they don't have to pay attention to what's happening to their body right now. Or they suppress all of these feelings until later when they can pick at their nails and their skin or self-harm in some way in order to distract themselves from overwhelming sensory input, because mild pain can be a focusing feeling in some ways. Or maybe they learn how to squash down those emotions so hard that they don't explode until later, and then nobody can tell that there's a correlation. We're not helping that child live weller and better in their body. We're actively doing the opposite, teaching them how to tolerate hurting their body and how to override their body's no when it's uncomfortable. And this literally used to be like the upheld practice in the field of occupational therapy. So this is not me coming as someone blaming other fields or blaming other parents. This is me saying that as people grew up and told us about their lived experience, that we started to realize that this was not desensitizing anybody. This was not helping anybody live better in their body. This was hurting people, and the whatever the origin of that sensory processing difference is, we've realized there's been a shift that we need to honor those sensory processing differences and figure out how to make accommodations, come up with changes in the environment, come up with, support tools that the child can access, and things like that.
I'm
So
going to stop you for just a second
yes,
because I think that you have brought like this really amazing point to focus, and especially when we're looking at how trauma can appear as sensory and how, that desensitization. And we talk about some kids who are triggered by touch, and then, right, so they just are learning how to, like you said, daydream as an example, and mask those feelings while they're in the environment and then let go. Quite often we see with our participants that the kids are being told, or the parents are being told that, everything's fine at school. Not sure what you're seeing at home because the child is masking for so long that when they get home, they're able to finally let it out. And I think it's just like, this is so fascinating for me to listen to you talk about this. And it was key, I think, that you mentioned this point. I just wanted to make sure that everyone else is also focusing on that point too, because it's so big in our worlds.
absolutely. And even in children who are not traumatized, the story of their final day at school, I don't know what you're talking about at home, is extremely common. And then it's, that's amplified 10 times with kids who come from traumatic backgrounds, who have maybe developed those types of masking skills out of even more crucial need for safety, or even more intensely so. And so I'm actually gonna this is a lot about sensory processing, and I'm going to shift gears a little bit and talk about dysregulation. Um which goes right into that coming home and exploding is dysregulation. In a lot of parenting spaces that I see on the internet, I hear the word regulate used as if it is a fancy way to say calm down. Dysregulation is sometimes used as a synonym for grumpiness or sadness, and it's a little more complex than either of those things. When I'm trying my best to use a non-jargony sounding term, the one that I typically find myself reaching for to substitute for dysregulated is the phrase out of whack. That's not perfect, but it's as close as I can get in slang terms. Another way of saying it could be that there is an energy mismatch between the person and the activity, or the person and the environment, or that they're out of sync. So then it's important to realize that regulated doesn't mean happy either. Someone can be regulated and contented, calm, serious. Someone could be regulated and sad or angry if the situation is actually calling for those things and the person is in control of themselves. Dysregulation can be affected by emotions like grumpiness or sadness, and it can be exacerbated by physical causes like hunger or discomfort. When someone is dysregulated, it means that their nervous system is not able to react appropriately to the situation that they're in. And regulation could have to do with sensory processing. It has a lot of overlap. Just like I was just describing, if there's a situation that's distressing somebody's sensory system, then what they're showing with their behavior might be that they're showing that distress. Regulation or dysregulation doesn't always have to do with sensory processing, though. It could be some social, interpersonal factor is causing the dysregulation. It could be a trauma-related factor. It could be emotional, environmental. It can be categorized in lots of different ways. So regulation, one way to say it is regulation means your energy levels match the task, and dysregulation means your energy levels do not match the task or the environment, what's going on. Why I say task because I'm thinking from a school lens, but the environment or the situation could also fit that sentence. A child who's laughing hysterically and kicking and squealing and play fighting is not regulated to go to sleep. A child who's laughing hysterically and running enthusiastically through an open field outside is perfectly regulated to play outside in a big open field. So the environment is a big component of what we're talking about when we talk about regulation. Sometimes helping a child regulate means taking the child and putting them into an environment where their level of energy now matches the environment. Sometimes helping a child regulate means helping their body get its needs met so that their energy can their energy can match the task that's up next. or the situation that they are in. So there's not just one way to regulate.
I have a comment. Patricia says, thank you so much for explaining that dysregulation can be seen as happy and excited. That my son, when happy, dysregulated, tends to escalate to a point of causing himself harm and is not able to regulate on his own.
Yeah.
I feel like the party pooper when I have to be the one who makes sure he doesn't get too excited.
I have two kids, and I run into that with my daughter, and my word for it, I don't know if there's a proper word for it, but I call it silly dysregulated, where she just gets in a loop. And so she'll be telling, silly words or silly jokes or something, and I'm keeping myself completely calm and flat, and I don't want her to grow up thinking like mom thinks I'm boring, or mom doesn't. But if I laugh and if I egg it on, she gets out of control of herself. She's not even having fun. She's like laughing, but it's not in an enjoyed way, and she's like, kind of hysterical and kind of kicking things. And so yes, I totally understand the silly dysregulated or happy dysregulated is a big one that and I say that example specifically because people think of dysregulated as just being sad, angry, crying, mad.
Patricia says it's like they separate from themselves.
Yes, it really is. A dysregulated brain has lost access to higher brain functions like logic, paying attention, self-control, use of language. When someone is dysregulated, their logic brain is not functioning in that moment. That means that trying to reason or lecture or punish them out of it is not going to help because their brain is not reacting out of logic. The fastest way for someone who is dysregulated to become regulated is called co-regulation. Co meaning with someone else, like cooperate or coworker. Humans are inherently social creatures. We are so social that being around someone who is regulated in their body plus time is all it takes to get regulated in our own body. Our body will unconsciously match their breathing or heart rate. Our body realizes that it is not in danger or under threat and stops putting out panic hormones that make us want to fight or run away. Kids are not the only ones who co-regulate, although they often need it as their primary coping strategy, where for adults, it's often one of many. When a child is born and placed with loving and responsive caregivers, these patterns are laid at birth. When a baby becomes dysregulated, they cry, they react with every fiber of their being to a state of something being wrong because they don't know how to tone down their reactions at all yet, or how to measure a situation and determine what kind of a reaction it merits. They pretty much only know how to scream with every bit of air in their lungs when anything feels wrong in their body at all. And in an ideal situation, in an ideal situation, a caregiver who can better assess the situation than the baby can takes care of the need that was causing them to cry. The caregiver's calm presence also co-regulates with their nervous system. Their brain learns for the first or second or third time that it is possible to move from a dysregulated state to a regulated state. Before that process happens, how would they know? It's all inward. It's not like they could watch it happen. They must co-regulate in order to learn that it's even possible for those feelings to pass and the storm to calm. If they don't have anyone to co-regulate with them, usually given time, the feelings eventually pass, the storm eventually calms, but rather than learning that they were safe with another person, they begin learning that they are all alone in those feelings. And maybe even eventually that suppressing those feelings is important in order to earn the right not to be alone. That might have been the case for many of our children who have been through foster care systems or who have experienced abuse or neglect. Anything that we do in life at all, walking, talking, riding a bike, memorizing a telephone number, reacting to our kids, anything we ever do is done by neurons in your brain firing. The neuron has to travel from one place to another, and then the next neuron does the next part of the action, like a relay race where they're handing off a baton. So you do something for the first time, and your neurons lay a pathway. Doing anything again for the second time will make the same set of neurons fire that did the first time. Then as we do it more and more, that set of neurons firing in that way becomes like a pathway. So the very first time, it was like a field of grass that no one's ever walked in before. and the neurons laid the first path, like you walk through this grass. And then over time it's laying it, and now it's a dirt road, and then over time it's a paved highway, and the more times that that path is traveled, the more well-worn and easily accessible the path becomes. Regulation is the same way. With time and maturity, the regulation pathway becomes easier to access, even without the help of someone to co-regulate. This learning process is called self-regulation. When a baby had someone to co-regulate with them, that taught that brain that it was possible to do. And then eventually they learned to do it themselves. They learned coping strategies. They learned how to ask for help. But this is a complex process with many, many components. And learning this skill might not just be a straight line pathway. I think that one place where parents and caregivers will start to get burnt out is the idea that co-regulating means that they, the parent or the adult, have to be dragged fully down into the bog of the child's emotions every single time that the child has emotions. And that might be happening really frequently with our kids who are hurting a lot. And I think that it's also important to understand that being empathetic doesn't mean having to be sucked all the way down into a hole. You can be authentically empathetic and give your child time and space for their emotions and validate their emotions, and yourself still stay out of that hole. It takes time and practice, and it's hard to implement when your kid is older, and it's hard to implement if you didn't get to start from the beginning, and it's hard to change things than it is to lay the groundwork from the beginning, but both are possible. I would say with my kids, fully half, if not more, of the empathy that I express during the day is little more than just like, oh man, that really sucks, or oh, I'm sorry that happened to you. And like, then that's it. I'm not saying that this is all I offer or all that I'm like willing to offer or that this is like as deep as my empathy ever goes. I just mean that like half of the time, that's all that was needed. Like that's my first thing that I say. And then I don't mean that I cut off my kids after that point. I mean that after I say that, they get what they needed from that interaction. Something didn't work just right. They wanted to be seen about it. They wanted their struggle and their frustration and their disappointment to be seen. And I acknowledge it and I fully see it. And then that doesn't mean that they snap back into happiness. Because again, regulation isn't equivalent to happy. They might still, like, if I'm in the kitchen trying to make food, they might still be flopping around on the floor next to my feet, being like, "This isn't fair." Blah, 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 blah. And I don't mean that I'm ignoring them either. I just mean that every once in a while I'm checking in and I'm like, "Oh yeah, that sucks. I wish that your video game hadn't done that. Oh man, I can't believe you ran out of lives. That's a real bummer." And I'm still, capable of carrying out what I need to do. And they're still, they know that they're fully loved and supported if what they need to do is flop around on the floor and tell me about it. And 2 years ago, they needed to destroy everything in the house and, tear everything off of everything. And I needed to hold them to keep them safe every time that they felt any feeling about anything. And so I can look back and I can see the progress that there's been, that those babies who didn't know how to do anything else other than scream with their whole being have had practice and examples of what it means to survive through the storm before. They might be able to do it halfway or 90% of the way with me and then get the rest of the way there by themselves. Self-regulation is not just one thing. It is a big skill. It is made out of a lot of little skills. These skills might include differentiating between things like, when is it helpful to distract myself, not process the emotion, but postpone the processing for later, versus when do I need to talk it all out instead? Or who is the right person to unload or vent to, and who should I politely keep things back from? Not necessarily teaching someone to mask, but it may not be best to emotionally unload on the cashier at the store versus your loving and supportive mom who's, there for you. We learn these things from going through this process over and over, from trial and error, from the modeling of people around us. But one thing we can only learn by experiencing it over and over and over and over is that emotions are survivable. We live through anxiety, sadness, overwhelming excitement. fear, frustration, and we survive it. We survive all of it. Feelings are wonderful and powerful and huge. The process of learning how to tolerate them while still keeping hold of your logic brain is challenging. And perhaps unsurprisingly, children do this a massive amount of the time through play. It's not just through their co-regulating with us that they learn to strengthen this skill. It is also through their repeated play over and over and over and over. I'm the occupational therapist. It was going to come up sometime. Now, here's the thing. A lot of public schools in the US and in the UK where I live, and I think all over a lot of the Western world, have begun figuring out how they can outright, overtly teach social emotional skills and things like self-regulation and coping skills to children. And I need to say outright that I'm not against that. I think it's actually fantastic that kids' mental health is being recognized as an important factor in their success in school, and that it's important enough for people to prioritize over academics or in tandem with academics. It makes perfect sense that this is a figuring out process and that it wasn't perfect from the get-go, because most things aren't. They take time to figure out. I think this is even more crucially important in the wake of COVID, which we really still are, with the amount of trauma that all students have experienced and many are ongoingly experiencing, that schools be aware of the power that they have to be able to equip kids with emotional skills like these and figure out how to use that power wisely and helpfully. And I think there are so many psychologists and therapists and school counselors and other supporting staff out there in the world who are trying really hard to do that. But there's a problem on a systemic level with this plan. And by systemic, I mean that I would never point to any like single counselor and be like, you're the problem here. And I would never blame a teacher for doing everything that they can within this system. But the system itself is set up for failure, or if not quite so drastic a word as for failure, then for a struggle, if nothing else. And the reason for that, in my experience, is that many schools and therapists and teachers, and even parents and caregivers who are taking their lead from the schools and the teachers, are trying to get their child to buy into a system of overt, artificial self-regulation tools, while systemically, the natural self-regulation skill building activities that they would go through play are almost entirely suppressed. Here's what I mean by that. Wrestling, rough and tumble play builds self-regulation. You learn how to interact with somebody else, how much power to use in your own body, how to, brush it off when you got a little bit bumped, how to make sure you don't bump somebody else, how to give and take, and in powerful play. Playing with risky tools and materials builds self-regulation. Playing freely with sensory-rich materials builds self-regulation. Playing socially with others, fighting, arguing, bickering, yelling, getting your feelings hurt, coming back from that, hurting other people's feelings, apologizing to them. Those things build self-regulation. Getting loud, yelling, moving through a range of volumes builds self-regulation. Trying hard to do hard things that you can't yet do, but that you chose for yourself, that you're motivated to do because of that, builds self-regulation. Sensory-rich stimming and fidgeting and play and self-soothing techniques are self-regulation tools. Picking things apart, ripping things up is a self-regulation tool. Sucking and chewing on and mouthing things is a self-regulation tool. Stomping your feet is a self-regulation tool. Yelling is a self-regulation tool. Crying is a self-regulation tool. Picking up heavy things and flipping them over is a self-regulation tool. Throwing yourself on the ground and feeling a hard impact through your body is a self-regulation tool. Running around, rolling, flipping, somersaulting, wiggling is a self-regulation tool. Almost every single one of those things I just named comes naturally to a child or a group of children left to their own devices. Almost every single one of those things I just named are utterly policed to the maximum degree by school and child care professionals and well-meaning parents and caregivers too. Some of that is necessary. I understand why there can't be a class of 30 kids and they're all just allowed to fight each other. Like, I get that. I'm not that far gone. That's why I call this a systemic issue. This is an issue in the way that our systems are built. We built systems that can't support children being children, and then we blame the children for the fact that it's not working. We have tried to replace all of the collective of these things with like a counselor will come into your classroom and teach you all how to take deep breaths and maybe do a yoga pose. And we wonder why it's not working sufficiently for them. It's like taking a plant and saying, well, we won't let it have any water or sunshine or soil, but we've put it under an artificial bulb and given it this scientifically engineered jelly, and we can't tell why it's not working. The ingredients you're using to replace the natural ones aren't the same thing. 20 minutes of recess, 40 minutes of recess with monitors around to boss kids about all the things they can't play and strict rules about how the kids can and can't move their bodies, and only peers who are available who are exactly the same age as you, and an artificial environment socially and in terms of materials around does not replace 6 to 8 hours of unstructured free play according to your own brain and your own ideas. It's like laughable to think that it could. And adding in practice with deep breathing and, oh, you take a brain break where everybody dances to a YouTube video for 3 minutes, which is incidentally trying to also teach you the ABCs. That doesn't make up for that lack either. It's like the system is going, hey, our kids are stressed out. Let's teach them factual information about bodily stress and some prepackaged solutions for de-stressing, rather than realizing that the reason that kids are stressed in the first place is a lot because they're spending all day, every day in a box that's designed to produce stress in them. Children need to move through the range of feelings in order to figure out how to make sense of those feelings in their body. I feel like rather than trying to co-regulate and knowing how to give a child space to flop around on the ground and moan and cry and feel all the things that they're feeling, adults tend to focus on the meaning of regulating as meaning, rush to the end, skip to the part where they're happy and quiet again. I run into that a lot in public in England where I live. I think my kids are quite shocking to some of the English kids' sensibilities sometimes. As Americans, we're kind of the loud ones in public anyway, and then it's even worse if somebody is sad. A huge part of the co-regulation and self-regulation is the process. It's not fast forwarding to the end, whether that's the process in terms of going through emotions when they come up in day-to-day life and being supported by your loved ones as you do so, or whether that's the process in practicing it through all forms of play. And when adults try to skip kids to the end of their feelings in day-to-day life, and when adults try to sanitize and police kids' play, then they take away all of the tools that the kids could possibly have for learning how to regulate themselves in healthy ways. And then they wonder why teaching kids to take deep breaths and count to 3 isn't working. Okay, so this may not help if you're in the trenches with your kids right now, which I know from experience that a lot of you absolutely are. And this can seem absolutely super unfair when you're talking about a child who you didn't get to start from their birth. You didn't get to start from square one. Like, this does not help me. I don't have 6 years of rapport with my kid, and we're both drowning right now, and they don't trust me, and I'm not in a good headspace, and they can't self-regulate, and I can't co-regulate, and nothing is working. Especially when adults didn't have a safe person to co-regulate with as a child, or who were primarily parented by having their emotions shut down rather than learning how to safely regulate. Absolutely 100% know somebody is listening who feels this way right now, and I get it. I absolutely get it. Your kids' emotions are, in fact, dragging you all the way down. Every time they have them, it's dragging you all the way down, and they're having them 300 times a day. I get it. It is hard work. Full stop. It is hard work to climb out of this hole. I'm sorry. You didn't even dig this hole. And it is going to set the foundation for your kid knowing how to climb supported out of a hole. All of this work we do, all of this emotional regulation, all of this learning, all of this is teaching them how to do it in childhood so they can live healthier and weller in their bodies in their childhood and so that they have it in their adulthood.
What
I didn't have any of this
great
until
points.
What'd you say?
Kelsie, I'm going to read a couple of the comments. I'll give you a second.
Cool.
So we have some comments on our Facebook page too about how society has completely taken away all of those aspects of play and it's making it difficult. Another comment about access to the PowerPoint to go through later. I'm not sure if will you have that for
I
us?
can make it, yeah, I can make it accessible.
Perfect. And then yeah, just lots of comments about how your personality is amazing and that you have great hair. Um, and just yeah, that you're doing a great job. And I I can empathize with you and how you're feeling right now too. I have shared many of the same feelings when it feels unfair and when you're living in the trenches. I think most of us, if not all of us, have felt that way. When you are so dysregulated yourself because you've just had three kids dropped on your door overnight and you don't know what the next shoe is going to be that's going to drop, and yet you have to be the person that's solid and steady for these kids so that they can process through all their big feelings. Is hard. You hit that nail right on the head. It is hard. And so thank you for taking a minute to validate that for everyone who is in it. And that we if you're our participant here and you're feeling that right now, that we do have our support coordinators on site like all the time. If you need to debrief or talk about this afterwards or anything, you can feel free to contact us too. And I'll let you get back to it.
I didn't have any of this until my adulthood. I lived catastrophically badly in my body in childhood. Even as I was having a good childhood, I had loving parents and a safe home. I still had lots of things going on where my emotions were an absolute wreck, and I didn't start untangling the mess that it had made until adulthood. So, any of the holes that I fell into in adulthood, I was learning as an adult how to survive the loss of a baby, having never been allowed to deeply feel any loss before, or how to navigate that depth of grief. So when I say to you, if you are in the trenches with your child right now and you're disconnected and lost and both of you are dysregulated, it is going to be hard work to climb out of that hole, and it is going to be the best and most important thing you can possibly do for them, because you are teaching them the way out together and that you are there with them, and they will see you learning that and navigating that, and it will set up that foundation for them forever. It is never too late to build trust with a child who might have had it broken in the past. It is never too late to build trust with your child again. It is absolutely doable to climb out of that hole or a little higher toward the top every day. It is hard and it is doable, and things will be good and lovely and worthwhile again. It is never too late to learn how to regulate, and in so doing, to become the person who can co regulate with your child, their safe space, their foundation for a more emotionally healthy adulthood. So, how do we do it? In the same way that lecturing or berating a child who is dysregulated doesn't fix the problem, neither does beating yourself up when you're dysregulated. Your logic brain is turned off, and you just have to power through until you get to the other side. Keep everyone as safe as possible. If beating yourself up worked, it would have worked by now. Did you know that yelling is, from a sensory perspective, strictly sensory perspective, a very regulating thing to do? That might sound weird. It might make your brain jump to conclusions that aren't what I'm trying to say. Think about it for a moment from a mental perspective of thinking of the mechanics of the body. Yelling requires you to take a deep breath, and usually to continue deep breathing as well. Yelling produces a sound, which is entirely within your control, and usually drowns out many, if not all, of the surrounding sounds in the environment for you, the yeller. Yelling often goes along with opening your jaw to a degree where you can feel a stretch, which is a powerful area of proprioception in your body as you forcefully yell whatever it is that you're yelling. Yelling is a powerful, energetic, emotional release. Also, of course, you don't need me to tell you that yelling at somebody in a negative or angry way can be harmful to your relationship with that person and to the emotions of both of you. But adults who struggle with yelling when they're in a challenging situation, or children, could be struggling with self regulation or sensory needs, just like children could. They could be struggling with one or many or all of these things. They could be meeting a sensory need to cover up a noise in the environment. For example, the kids are getting too loud, so you suddenly snap and yell at them to stop. Your yell covers up the noise briefly. Your body feels like that will help, even if the logical part of your brain knows that it won't. You could be meeting a sensory need to have strong, self regulating, proprioceptive, deep body pressure, sensory input through your throat, jaw, tongue, lungs, abdomen. Deep body pressure is one of the fastest and most dependable ways to self regulate. So your body gets pushed to a point where a switch flips and it goes, I need a burst of self regulating sensory input right now. You could be meeting a self regulation need to take a deep breath and soothe the nervous system that is crying out for a deep breath. But coupled with the triggers in the environment, the person yelled in addition to the breath instead of just taking a breath. You could be meeting an anxiety based need to assure yourself that you do have control over the situation or that you do have power and are not powerless. Yelling is big and powerful, and it feels like it will be reassuring to the body to do a big, powerful move. Again, even if your logic brain knows that it's not going to help anything. You could be meeting an anxiety based need to suddenly do something rather than nothing. You get pushed past the point where you felt like, I'm going to let it go, I'm going to let it go, I'm going to let it go. Never mind, I can't. I have to do something now. I can't do nothing. So the action comes out of you quick and strong rather than being a measured action. Could be meeting a need for conflict resolution, but only knowing how to copy the patterns that were modeled for them. They never saw anyone or learned any way to deal with conflict other than escalating to yelling. Or could be meeting a need for conflict resolution and doing their absolute best to be an improvement on patterns that were modeled for them that were even more harmful than yelling, like hitting or abuse. And this is the best way that they know how to do it. The purpose of me going into this rabbit trail is an example of reframing what it is that you're doing, you, the adult. This is all applicable to children too, but right now I'm talking to you, the adult. What you're doing when you're dysregulated to try to help you find the root and help grow something different from that root instead. If you can take stock of your body after it has happened or at a time when you're reflecting on sometime when this happened and figure out that you, the adult, are yelling because you need to take a deep breath, then you can later try replacing it with taking a deep breath. But if it has nothing to do with taking a deep breath and more to do with you unconsciously copying an old pattern, then you might need to start immersing yourself in reading or watching videos of other people's scripts or how other people respond to challenging or triggering situations so that you can start feeding your brain new patterns. Trying to tell yourself take a deep breath if you're responding to a pattern is not going to solve anything. You're going to take a deep breath and then you're going to use your deep breath to yell again because you've only got the old pattern. But if you try watching a bunch of scripts about other things you can say when you need to yell, but your body just physiologically needs to take a deep breath, then you might try saying all the other things that you need to say and none of them work because you just need to take a deep breath. So then you take a deep breath and you yell with it. The key here is that outside of that already out of whack moment, we can learn and practice coping tools. Some popular ones include deep breathing, doing body check-ins where you unclench the tension in your jaw and shoulders and fists and focus on relaxing your muscles. This forces your body to consciously release the nervous tension it had that was preparing for a fight or to run away. Strategically distracting yourself can be another tool, although you should use it appropriately because you can't always check out of every situation, but you might be able to use distraction to get through a moment of crisis into a moment where you will have more resources to handle something. The most powerful thing for me has been practicing pausing. Almost every parenting mistake I regret has been when I snap reacted and didn't pause. So now I try to sit and remind myself, this is not an emergency. There is time to figure out how to react. And just like my kids practice self-regulation through play, I do it too. I practice pausing in times when I don't actually need to pause, when I'm not on the brink of becoming dysregulated. My kid says, can we have some grapes? And I practice pausing. And I think to myself, grapes, yes, good idea. And then I say out loud, grapes, yes, good idea. And now I've practiced having the thought before I said the thing. I didn't need to with the grapes. I wasn't about to freak out about grapes. I needed to teach my brain when my kid says something, I can think for a second and think out my whole thought and then reply, and that will be fine. at a time when it was already going to be fine, regardless of what I did. Because that means that at a future time, when my kid says something and my snap reaction would have been to yell at them, but my think reaction is to think it through, then my brain goes, that's right, I think about things before I say them to my kid.
This is all so fascinating. So fascinating to just put a what we call negative behavior, like yelling, and turn it into a sensory behavior and like the steps that you've just broken. This is truly fascinating. And the comments are showing the same thing. Like you've hit the nail on the head. This is me and my husband. And like the pause practice is so doable and the truly fascinating. Thank you for this.
The more we practice, the stronger the self-regulation pathway becomes. That makes it easier and easier for us to access. And that models for our children how they can do it. First, as they co-regulate in time with us, and then later as they copy what they've seen us do. If you are all the way in the trenches with your child, I think the first thing you do is drop everything that you possibly can that you expect of your child and mega prioritize as hard as you possibly can, doing whatever it would take to get yourself to a place of at least short bursts of regulation. Maybe you can't get your whole life back on track in a day when you're all the way burnt out and everything is terrible, but maybe you can get to the point where you feel like you yourself can emotionally manage things for the first hour of the morning before everything goes wrong. Or maybe there's an hour from 5 to 6 p.m. after everybody's eaten dinner, but before you roll into bedtime struggles. And that's where it is. That's your hour that you're regulated. And then start building relationship connecting things with your child into that brief moment of time where you are regulated and you have yourself pulled together. And this is in tandem with dropping all of the things that aren't important. So you know what this might look like? We have popsicles for breakfast, and I'm asking you no questions at all, and I'm just telling you that I think that you're a lovely person to be around, and we're just enjoying each other's company. Or I'm saying nothing at all about the thing that you dropped on the floor that's supposed to go somewhere else, and I'm not asking you anything at all about how school was because that gets perceived as a demand. I'm just telling you as softly and genuinely as I can, I was thinking about you today. Or I'm playing a video game alongside you because nothing is good for you except video games right now. So I'm going to meet you in your world, in the world that you're the master of, and I'm going to learn from you, and you get to be the powerful one here. I build you something silly in Minecraft. Or think about, I don't know if you know the 5 love languages, but think about their love language and maybe see if you can take that for some inspiration. Are words going to be the thing that meets them? Is buying them a little gift or making them a little thing going to be the thing that meets them? Is spending time with them going to be the thing? Is service going to be the thing? Is touch going to be the thing for them? And then set yourself a mental goal and try to do this maybe once a week, twice a month, whatever you think you could do without burning yourself back out, because you're doing both things at the same time here. You're trying to build the connection with them and you're trying to haul yourself out of the hole that you're into. And then try to pepper the rest of the time with just little 1 second moments if you possibly can. You say one sentence, you make an effort to compliment them, tell them why you think they're cool, tell them why you love them, not making such a huge deal out of it that you're going to embarrass them or make them react. Just like, this is such an obvious fact of life that it's going to bubble out in conversation sometimes. I can't help it. You're so cool. You're so great. I love you. And then in addition to the relationship building, I urge you to ask yourself what you can accept. The hardest times in my entire parenting journey, let's see, is this the right slide? Yeah. The hardest times in my entire parenting journey have been when I simply refused to accept how things would be for a little while, or maybe even a long while. And these things shifted the most imaginable when the only thing that changed was that I accepted them. So for a while, my son would have a screaming, throwing things, raging meltdown at bedtime every single day. And we moved his bedtime as early as it felt like would be humanly reasonable. And he was still doing it. He wasn't mad to go to bed. I was not asking him to do one single thing. He came home from school, not one single thing, not one demand, not one request, not anything in the entire afternoon and evening other than let me put bedtime underwear on you so you don't wet the bed. Let me brush your teeth for you. And sometimes we were even skipping teeth, and sometimes we were even skipping bedtime underwear, and I would sneak in after he was asleep and put a pad under him or change his clothes. And even with as few demands as I could possibly think of, he was still raging and melting down every single day. And I felt like a failure. I questioned myself. I felt like an imposter for doing these types of talks, for writing on my Facebook page as if I couldn't even fix my own kid. And then it took a conversation with a friend for me to realize that that was how I was seeing it. And once I fixed my own framework to realize maybe this is just how it is right now, the whole thing became so different. Nothing changed about my son at all. I just went into bedtime thinking, I'll go tuck my daughter in, and then I will go sit in my son's room quietly with my arms open in case he wants cuddles while he cries and lets all of his feelings out, rather than thinking, I sure hope he doesn't cry today, when all evidence was that he had done it daily for weeks. And then he just grew out of that phase. I didn't even notice when he did. I wasn't desperate for the end of it anymore. And it coincided with a lot of things, and socializing is hard, and being around people after COVID is over is hard, and uh and I just accepted that he needed to cry for a while in order to process the day and in order to fall asleep, and that I'd be there with him to keep him safe through it, and we got through it. So drop everything you can possibly drop, accept everything you can possibly accept, regulate yourself as much as you can possibly regulate yourself. Start looking for short bursts where you are regulated enough to connect with your child and start building a foundation of connection. Ask yourself where, if anywhere, you might be able to let them practice regulation in ways that are play based or are otherwise just practice and don't have emotional precursors involved. Can you guys listen to rock music in the car and shout them together? Shout the lyrics to them together. Can you roughhouse and practice getting your energy up and then back down? Can you spend more time climbing things or lifting heavy things or building something or working on a physical, heavy, involved project together? Like digging, pulling, pushing, climbing, building, creating. Uh, I don't have a slide about it, but I've found that role play is a really important role play and imaginative play, if your kid is into that, um, have been really important outlets for this too. And I have I'm going off script here, so that's why I suddenly sound less polished, but I have done a lot with me being the nonverbal character in play. Both of my children have different uh, neurologies, unique brains, and had journey of learning language that was challenging for both of them to learn how to be able to make themselves understood and communicate with other people in ways that other people would understand, and it was a learning process for us too as we learned how to understand what they were trying to tell us. And neither of them have ever been the one in a room who was the most easily understood out of their peers. And I run into this a lot at work too with kids who I work with who have speech therapy, who have language struggles, who might have had a speech impediment, who might have had other language learning difficulties. And both at work and at home, me role playing as the least powerful player in the game or the nonverbal player in the game has been a really shockingly powerful thing for them. So usually I'm a baby or I'm a puppy or a kitty or a monster or an animal. And so I don't speak words, but I have a noise, and I can put all of my intonation into that noise. And I might sometimes be silly with it too. So if I'm being a cat and I need to count to three or whatever, I might be like meow, 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 and like I'm like as if I'm counting 1, 2, 3, and then they are the more powerful ones, and they're the ones who have all of the speech and who can teach me all of the things, and I don't know anything, and I don't know the rules, and I don't know how to do things right, and they have to teach me. And that type of play can be so powerful because kids are the powerless ones all day long in their whole lives, and the kids getting to be the powerful ones in the play is really, really regulating. And it means that they get to play through scenarios that they might be experiencing or scenarios that they might be imagining. And so I could probably do a whole talk on that. So I'm going to pull myself back to what it is that I actually have to say, because we're coming up on on our time limit here before we do questions. So the last thing that I would suggest, if you're in the trenches, whether whether you're in the trenches or whether you're just, no matter what your family is feeling like lately, whether you're just trying to come to a more informed place, is to learn about interoception, because I don't think that it's a relatively new field that's being studied and described. It's not that it's a new thing to exist, but the description of it has really just like exploded in the last few years. And you, the adult caregiver, learn about it and then also model that and teach that for your children. So I already mentioned how interoception, the sense of what's going on inside your body, can be broken into two parts: emotional feelings and biological feelings. And it's confusing because in English we use the word feelings to mean both emotion and also like sensation. Biological feelings can be a little more straightforward to understand. Those would be like your need to use the toilet, your feeling of hunger, thirst, sleepiness. And then emotional feelings, of course, they're your emotions, but they're also tied to physical sensations too. At its most basic, interoception is your inner body sense, but there are a lot of inner body sensations, and ascribing the meaning is a whole other piece of the puzzle. Are you able to notice the sensation itself? Some people don't notice the sensations that they're having, or certain sensations. Are you able to take that sensation and interpret meaning from it? That's interoception. It's an intensely personal study because people's interpretations might be different, because people's bodies communicate in different ways. Maybe when I notice my hands getting hot and sweaty, I realize I'm anxious about something. But maybe when your hands get hot and sweaty, it means you're angry about something. And when some other person's hands get hot and sweaty, it just means they need to take off their jacket. Those are vastly different interpretations and they can all be right. So this all obviously ties in with your regulation too. I can tell I'm starting to get dysregulated when it feels like my throat has swelled up and I can't speak. I can tell that I'm starting to get dysregulated when it feels like my ears are on fire, or when it feels like something making contact with my skin, just touching it, is making it burn and I need to get it off. These are all physical sensations. I don't have to name an emotion associated with it, which can be super important for kids who are neurodivergent in some way, or even for kids who are young or struggle with language for any reason. It would be impossible for me to stand in their body, so it is really impossible for me to tell them exactly what emotion they are feeling. I might be able to make a reasonable guess, but it might not be guaranteed to be right. People do a lot of things that don't always fit the mold, like a child laughing, like we talked about, because their body is dysregulated and nervous and out of whack. But then somebody sees their laughter and interprets it as them being defiant and rude because they just did something wrong and now they're laughing about it. Look at that. They don't even care. So rather than project the emotional word onto it in myself or in others, I can just identify exactly what the sensation is, however those feel. There are a few resources that I mentioned here that are working on creating, like Autism Level Up is creating alternate feeling words that aren't things like sad, mad, happy, but are things like buzz, flame, too much, blub, blub. And there are picture cards that kids can use to identify the feeling without having to define it into an emotion. They can just report the sensation. I've seen the speech therapist Tara Sumter suggest modeling use of colors or characters or descriptions, whatever is authentic to the person or the child. Like, it feels like a river in my chest, or it feels like bluey in my heart, or it feels red in my throat. That would be personal and explained between the caregiver and the child more than to anyone else. My own son used to tell me, it will hurt my eyes. And he meant that something was taking too long and making him feel impatient or full of longing for the future. And he's still not old enough or articulate enough to explain to me why it would hurt his eyes. But he came up with it on his own and he expressed it that way, and he expresses it that way consistently. And that language means exactly what it needs to mean for him. If he says, when is Christmas? And I say, it's in 300 days, and he says, oh, that'll hurt my eyes, I know that he means, oh my gosh, that's too far, that's too long. So when schools and teachers and caregivers and parents try to teach kids self-regulation, this is another reason that it might miss the mark. Not that their work isn't important or isn't good, but it's so generalized that it may be meaningless if a child is missing their interoceptive cues. Interoception can be too strong, it can be too weak, it can be distorted, it may not be the same across body parts. maybe you're really sensitive to noticing when you're hungry and you know the exact minute of the day when you need to have your first snack so you don't become a hangry monster, but you don't realize that you need to go to the toilet until like 4 seconds before you're going to burst. So if we're looking at a child who goes into a rage all the time and their school and their caregivers are all trying to teach them how to self-regulate with coping strategies, take deep breaths when you're mad, go for a walk, listen to music, all those things might be fine, but we only know that they might be because we're just guessing what will work for them, what will feel good for them. They're not necessarily the child's natural choices. They're just ones that society says are good ones. And all of those things rely on the child being able to notice when they're angry. And we might think, of course, you know when you're angry. It's when stuff makes you feel angry. But you can see how vague that is. Maybe the child didn't notice anything at all. Interoception is so intensely personal. And it can be a much more challenging learning experience for autistic people, for other neurodiverse people, for people who have lived through trauma or had to mask at some time in their past because they've disconnected some part of their body from their mind being able to report or accurately tell what it is feeling because it was too overwhelming to do that. So being aware of interoception's existence as one of the body senses and making intentional efforts to learn about it can help, regardless of what age you are. Kelly Mahler is the OT who's like the foremost expert on the field of interoception research, and she's got loads of information and resources. So I know that this has been a lot of theory, especially the second part, and not a lot of case studies, just like a few personal stories. I have many more in my mind, but the theory is what feels like it applies to everyone. And sometimes it's hard to pull the right things out of case studies or highly specific answers. But I tried to leave enough time at the end of this so that I could do the specific, the case studies or the personal answers, because I know that there must be some people who have specific questions about how this should look in practice. And so we can jump into that right now.
Okay, so before we go into our question and answer section, we are going to stop our recording. So if you're watching us online on our Facebook page right now, thank you for joining us. If you're interested in next time coming into the question and answer, just register and attend, and you'll be privy to that as well.